When spring storms move through Texas cities, they can intensify, creating dangerous flooding. New research explains why on today's Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm Angela Kocherga in El Paso. It's runoff election day in Texas, and while all eyes are on the Republican Senate contest, we'll also spotlight some other key races to watch as the ballots are counted. Also ahead, Memorial Day ushered in the summer travel season, and plenty of Texans are planning vacations and looking for trips to fit their budgets. Plus, we're heading into Game 5 of the Western Conference playoffs. Can the Spurs repeat their strong performance and pull off another win? Those stories and much more ahead on the Texas Standard. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 26th day of May 2026. I'm Angela Kocherga, and so glad you can join us. It's primary runoff election day here in Texas, and many eyes are on the Republican contest for senator. Incumbent John Cornyn faces challenger Ken Paxton in a race political observers expect will say a lot about GOP voters and the party in Texas. But there are plenty of other runoff races of note for both parties on the ballot today, and we'll take a look at 5 things to watch a little later in our program. But as many Texans head to the polls, many parts of the state are dealing with the aftermath of storms, with more expected later today through parts of north and south central Texas. This time of year, severe thunderstorms with large hail, damaging winds, tornadoes, and dangerous lightning are common. But depending on where a storm hits, it can intensify. A team of researchers looked at more than 2 decades of climate data here in the Lone Star State to get a sense of how urban and rural areas interact with storms. They examined 40,000 storms in Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. David Brown talked to John Nielsen Gammon with Texas A&M and the state climatologist about the study.
What we did was we looked at a couple decades worth of storms hitting 4 major cities in Texas, DFW, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. And we compared the storms in those cities to storms in surrounding areas to see what sort of differences there were in the behavior of those storms as they formed and moved across the metropolitan areas.
How interesting. So did you find any noteworthy differences?
Well, the differences, if you look at it in bulk, they were kind of subtle, but they really emerged once we categorized the storms into different types. Right? Everybody knows that different weather systems look differently. An individual thunderstorm is going to be different from a cold front, is going to be different from a tropical storm, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And it turns out they respond differently to urban areas as well. Probably the biggest finding was how important urban areas were toward individual thunderstorms or smaller scale collections of thunderstorms. Every single city we looked at, the storms were enhanced there, both the daytime and especially nighttime. So there's a big urban influence in those types of precipitation events.
So you're looking at these storms event by event, and you're tracking them as they develop, they move, and ultimately dissipate. Did they fall into some pretty clear-cut categories once you started doing that?
Yeah, I mentioned, they broke down into the individual storms, small-scale stuff. Then we also saw, a lot, that accounts for the largest number of events. Mm-hmm. But greatest amount of precipitation tends to occur with the larger scale, more organized systems. Storm systems moving in from the north and northwest. We tend to call those cold front type storms. Convection, large scale convection coming in from the south off the Gulf of Mexico. We referred to those as warm frontal storms. And then there were organized tropical storms as well. So, we found that, for example, for cold fronts, cities sort of have the opposite effect. They didn't reduce the number of events because you've got large-scale stuff coming through. They affected the intensity, and actually we saw the storms weaken as they moved across the cities.
And across all four cities that you looked into, these storms seem to be occurring more often over urban areas than over nearby rural land. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's right. For the individual thunderstorms, yes. In Houston, it was even more enhanced because you also had Galveston Bay, which is cooler than the city, and so it tended to suppress thunderstorms, and so the enhancement in Houston was even stronger than in the other urban areas.
Why? What is that? Is that about differences in temperature, that urban areas tend to store more heat, and something about the way that that precipitation works when it encounters that heat?
Yeah, it seems to be mainly the temperature effect, and it's not when the storms are encountering the heat so much as the heat is helping to trigger the storms in the first place. It's making the low-level air more unstable so it can feed into the thunderstorms and make them more intense and, in fact, taller, as we found.
Interesting. And as these storms cross cities, what happens then? Do the cities tend to weaken the effect of storms as they move through?
Well, for the individual thunderstorms, they provide a local enhancement. There can be other local effects from the cities being typically rougher than the surrounding countryside, more buildings, and so it has an effect on the wind patterns. It can produce convergence in different places, and that can enhance storms locally. And also, there's more pollution in cities, and tiny particles in the air can affect how precipitation forms and develops. We didn't try to separate out those mechanisms, but they're all present in a city, and that's not surprising that the weather does respond to the presence of those cities.
You know, one of the reasons that this data is important is that, well, it can be, I think the thinking is it can be critical for urban planning. And we've been talking a lot about the changing face of Texas, the demographics, the growth, and that sort of thing. And I think in the past, if you were, say, doing urban planning, you would look to average rainfall statistics and think about what that means for the drainage systems you design and maybe flood control infrastructure, that kind of thing. It sounds like maybe just looking at something like rainfall statistics won't cut it, that what you're finding is there has to be a much more nuanced approach if you want to plan effectively for how to handle extreme weather.
Quite possibly. We didn't look specifically at extreme precipitation in our study. We didn't look at whether weak storms are affected differently from strong storms, for example. Yeah, you're designing infrastructure, culverts, and so forth, and defining floodplains based on the statistics of extreme rainfall over a fairly large area without consideration of whether particular spots in the city or in the surrounding countryside. So it's certainly possible that something we need to factor in with future design, but it's going to take additional work to figure out how much of an impact it does have on those rainfall extremes that can cause damage.
So if you were designing the headline for the takeaway from this research, this very data-intensive research here, what would you say? What is the headline for this research?
Well, I would say that on the one hand, storms are influenced by the presence of cities, but it depends on the type of storm as to what sort of influence the city is going to have. It's not just you can't just make a blanket statement about how urban areas affect the weather. It very much depends on the particular situation, but they do have an impact.
And I guess this also means that we need to learn how to ask the right questions when we're trying to forward plan.
That's a key aspect of scientific research as well. You don't get the interesting answers until you figure out what the appropriate question is.
Storm-specific insights, a big takeaway from this new research from Texas A&M University, collaborating with researcher at University of Texas at Austin. We've been talking with John Nielsen Gammon. He is the Texas State climatologist, and he's on the faculty in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences at Texas A&M. We're going to have a link to more so you can dig in a little deeper at texasstandard.org. John, thanks so much for talking with us. We certainly do appreciate it.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you.
Audience and engagement editor Wells Dunbar is here now with the Talk of Texas. Hi, Wells.
Hi, Angela. Always great to be with you. And perhaps no surprise here, we're talking about the primary runoff elections today. Lots of chatter out there. I don't know if you're a betting woman, Angela, but I have to tell you about these odds I'm seeing on Polymarket, the so-called predictions website. Heard of that one?
I have, and I'm not betting on that.
Yeah, well, it's showing a 96% chance for one Ken Paxton in the closely watched Republican Senate primary. So making for some long odds there for incumbent John Cornyn. But of course, anything can happen. One interesting comment I'm seeing this morning on the Texas Politics subreddit, there one Redditor makes an interesting comparison. This top comment reading that with a potential changing of the guard in the Texas Senate representation, voters could also be losing representation, essentially equivalent to the recent SCOTUS gerrymandering effect. So an interesting comparison being teased out there in the comments. Another Texas Politics user with a popular sentiment saying a lot of stuff like this. Looking forward to the end of political advertising, at least for now. This Redditor describing what they call a whole damn do-over of MAGA versus MAGA political ads, which is made anywhere near local broadcasts unbearable. Yeah, staggering to think about the amount of money poured into that Texas Senate Republican runoff there between Cornyn and Paxton, and we are due to see a resolution tonight. So definitely going to be a fascinating one to watch. And of course, we want to hear from folks out there, their perspectives on what's happening, what races they're watching, and what outcomes they are curious to see. So go to texasstandard.org/talk. We'd love for them to record an audio message for us that we can use on the air. And you know what, Angela? I'm going to be back with some more comments about the election later in the program.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that. There's much more ahead. Texans are bracing for higher gas prices and plane tickets, but they're not canceling summer vacation plans yet. Stay with us. Details when the Standard continues.
Support for Texas Standard comes from University Extension at UT Austin, offering open enrollment to a wide variety of UT's undergraduate credit courses that can be taken by anyone from anywhere. Learn more at extension.utexas.edu.
This is the Texas Standard. I'm Angela Kocherga. Well, we've kicked off the summer travel season, and it's estimated that more than 3.5 million Texans traveled over the Memorial Day holiday weekend. That's about the same as last year. Despite higher gas and flight prices caused by the war in Iran, Houston Public Media's Natalie Weber reports Texans are still finding ways to fit vacations into their summer budgets.
It's a busy afternoon at the Murphy Express gas station off I-45 in southeast Houston. Roderick Cozy is filling up his car. He's going on a road trip to Miami next month, where he'll visit his cousin and the beach.
It's gonna kill us to drive down there, you understand?
Cozy drove from North Houston to this gas station, drawn by the cheaper prices.
I wish they had these gas prices down there in Miami. That's what I wish, but you gotta do what you gotta do.
While Texans are bracing for higher gas prices and flight costs, they're not canceling their summer travel plans just yet.
Historically, when we've seen gas prices higher heading into a big major holiday travel period, it does not deter most people from taking that trip.
AAA's Doug Shoup says travel remains a priority for many Texans, though some are trimming their budgets.
They may adjust their schedules a little bit. Perhaps they don't drive as far, or they don't go for as many days, or they stay with friends and family instead of spending money at hotels, or they'll pack food for the road trip instead of spending money at restaurants.
Meanwhile, Houston's tourism leaders expect the FIFA World Cup to boost visitors to the city next month, at least for the first few weeks of summer. AJ Mistretta is with the Houston First Corporation, which oversees tourism for the city.
Beyond, the second week of July when World Cup wraps up, at least for us, it's to be determined. Will we see a decrease in leisure visitors? We hope not.
Mistretta says Houston hotels are coming off of a record first quarter, with hotel stays boosted by events such as the Houston Rodeo, the World Baseball Classic, and Spring Break. Right now, he says hotel bookings are about the same as they were this time last year.
I think everybody's kind of taking a wait-and-see approach. We don't know yet if it's going to be a significant impact.
Back at the Murphy Express gas station, Laura Vasquez says her family is planning to drive up to 16 hours to visit relatives in San Luis Potosi in Mexico this summer. Vasquez says her family is budgeting $800 just to pay for gas for the road trip. That's double what they normally pay.
We were planning to visit different cities in Mexico, but because of the gas prices, we probably have to cut it down and maybe wait until next year.
I'm Natalie Weber in Houston.
And you're listening to the Texas Standard. Waymo has temporarily pulled its autonomous vehicles from 6 cities, including 4 in Texas. It comes after a federal investigation of safety concerns during flooding. Waymo operates vehicles in Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston. The Standard's Shelley Brisbane has been following the story, and she's here with an update. Hi, Shelley.
Hi, Angela.
So why did Waymo cars come off the streets in Texas?
Well, it started in April when an empty Waymo drove into a flooded San Antonio intersection. And then earlier this month, Waymo announced it would recall its vehicles in several cities. In this case, that meant a software update to address these flooding issues. This was after the National Transportation Safety Administration wrote to the company expressing its concerns about how the cars behaved when flooding was in the area. Last week, during heavy rains in Atlanta, 2 Waymos stopped on city streets, and a video of one incident went viral. Then Waymo announced it was suspending service to Atlanta, Nashville, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin. And Angela, it's worth noting that this time of year often sees really heavy rains in many parts of Texas.
Yeah, definitely. And was anyone in that car in that viral video? I haven't seen it, but that sounds very scary.
That video was taken by an Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter who got out of the car and went and took an Uber when her Waymo stopped in the middle of the intersection.
So there's another Waymo recall happening as well? Tell us about that.
In some Waymo cities, the cars can operate on highways, and the company has paused those operations too. They say it's to improve how Waymos operate in highway construction zones, and it affects operations in Los Angeles, San Francisco Bay Area, Miami, and Phoenix.
So flooding and highway issues. Now, the company has had other safety issues. Tell us about those.
Yes, we've talked before on the Standard about problems in Austin with Waymo passing school buses that were unloading and loading passengers, a case in which a Waymo blocked first responders briefly after they were trying to respond to a shooting in Austin, and a couple of cases where animals were unfortunately killed by Waymo cars, one in Austin and one in L.A.
Well, how many vehicles are we talking about?
Waymo doesn't directly release those numbers, but estimates are that there's something like 2,000 to 3,000 Waymos in cities across the country. In Austin, where rides have been available since spring 2025, the estimate is 200 to 300 vehicles. The service came to Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio earlier this year, launching with perhaps dozens of cars in Houston, according to one estimate.
So any idea when Waymo will be back on the road in Texas? And has the company said anything about all of this?
Waymo has used the word soon for both of these recalls, the one based on flooding behavior and the highway recall in other parts of the country. It really isn't clear yet what soon means or what changes Waymo will have to make in order to get back on the road. Waymo tends not to be particularly detailed in their press communications. They also don't always respond to governments, local governments, or to the public when they have concerns about something that's going on in their communities. Waymo will respond to when the NHTSA or federal agencies get involved. But so far, their communication about when these recalls might be over has been, incomplete.
So you mentioned the animals hit by Waymo cars. Well, what kind of animals? Wild animals? Were they large? Were they small?
Yeah, unfortunately, a couple of animals have been hit and killed. A cat in Santa Monica that was apparently a very well-beloved neighborhood cat was hit by a Waymo car. In Austin, the Mueller development has a big lake at the center of a park. A lot of ducks tend to congregate there, and one of those ducks was killed by a car as well.
What else should people know about these ride-hailing autonomous vehicles?
Well, Waymo really is the leading provider of ride-hailing autonomous vehicles in the country right now. There are other companies like Tesla and Zoox, which is owned by Amazon, and other companies that want to get into the market that have not yet, and they are operating pilots in some cities, but not nearly as many as Waymo. And so the incidents that you see with Waymo is a result of the vast number of miles that they've driven. There have been incidents with Tesla cars in Austin, for example, but just not as many. And you can't make as many generalizations about the way those cars behave as you can about Waymos because of the sheer volume of rides they've been giving on a daily basis in a lot of cities around the country.
Shelley Brisbane keeps track of tech and transportation for us here on The Standard. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, Angela.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Half Price Books, a Texas-bred new and used bookstore, proudly supporting public media and sustainability by keeping books, music, and other media in circulation. Store locations and more information at hpb.com.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Matt Harrop. Today is Election Day for the Texas primary runoff contests. Our Andrew Schneider has the details about how to participate.
Voters should remember to bring with them to the polls one of the state's 7 accepted forms of photo identification. The list of acceptable forms of ID is available at votetexas.gov. For voters under 70, that ID must be current or expired for no more than 4 years. For voters 70 and older, any form of acceptable photo ID is valid, expired or not. If they don't possess one of the accepted forms of photo ID, voters can present one of several supporting forms of ID and sign a reasonable impediment declaration. The list of possible supporting forms of ID is also available at votetexas.gov. Voters who participated in the March primary can only vote in the primary of the same party they did previously. Polls close at 7 p.m. I'm Andrew Schneider in Houston.
Today's election features a contest between incumbent U.S. Senator John Cornyn and Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Paxton was already leading in most polls before he was endorsed last week by President Trump. George Bush Airport in Houston is one of 3 airports nationwide designated as a screening location for travelers coming from a country with an Ebola outbreak. That has been a concern because of the number of international travelers coming to the U.S. for the World Cup. Harris County Judge Lena Hidalgo says local health officials are prepared.
If they have symptoms, then they will be quarantined, they will be tested, we'll go from there. If they don't have symptoms, we'll be in touch with them. I've made sure that Harris County Public Health has the people, has the resources to do any follow-ups, any contact tracing. And for better or worse, we've flexed that muscle before, right, during COVID.
The Democratic Republic of Congo is one of the countries hard hit by the Ebola outbreak. They are supposed to be in Houston for their first match and have a base camp for the duration of the World Cup in Houston as well. And a new study published in the scientific journal Nature suggests a large swath of the Louisiana coast has reached a point of no return from sea level rise. Sea levels along the Texas coast are rising nearly twice as fast as the global average. Texas may not be much better off than Louisiana in facing long-term coastal impacts. Dominic Boyer, a professor of anthropology at Rice University, says though the projections for the study are 75 years away, we need to act now.
Mitigation is the thing we all have to focus on. We all have to try to reduce emissions any way we can, and that means we not only have to act individually, but collectively.
He says levels are increasing by nearly a centimeter each year. I'm Matt Harrop in the Texas Newsroom.
You're listening to statewide news from public radio stations across Texas. This coverage is only possible because of support from listeners like you. You can help sustain and grow Texas news coverage by donating to your local public radio station today.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm Laura Rice. The San Antonio Spurs have tied up the Western Conference Finals. It's 2-2 going into Game 5 tonight against the Oklahoma City Thunder. But the Spurs are not only facing the defending champs, but an away crowd for 2 games. Still, the Spurs looked in top form in Sunday's game, walloping the Thunder 103-82. Dan Katz is Vice President of News at Texas Public Radio and someone who plans his spring around playoff basketball. Dan, welcome back to the Texas Standard.
Great to be here.
So be honest, when you were planning your spring, did you expect to still be talking about the Spurs this deep into May?
Absolutely. The talent on this roster is undeniable. And 7'5" phenom Victor Wembanyama is unlike anything the league has ever seen, period. The question was never whether the Spurs could become great. The question was whether a team this young could grow up fast enough to survive a playoff run like this. And despite the Spurs' relative lack of playoff experience, forward Devin Vassell says that that's no longer part of the conversation.
We've had all the experience we've needed this regular season, and we're going to keep proving everybody wrong.
This has been a dynamic series. The Spurs started it off with a win in double overtime in OKC. Then the Thunder took the next 2 games. Then the Spurs didn't just win, but dominated on Sunday. Still, am I right to say that even getting to this point hasn't been easy?
No, and that's part of what's made this run so compelling. Wemby's been bodied all postseason. You had what felt like the elbow herd round the world in that Portland series, and the Spurs have taken some real punches. But every time it's felt like that momentum was slipping away, they've answered with a huge win.
Talk to me about coaching. Mitch Johnson took over as head coach after Greg Popovich stepped down following his stroke last year. But is his presence still strong in this playoff run?
For sure. And after that Portland game, after what felt like that elbow heard round the world with Wemby, several players talked about Popovich meeting up the team at the airport when they got back to San Antonio. And fans also saw Coach Pop and Tim Duncan together at a skybox during Game 4 at the Frost Bank Center. And after one of the tougher losses in this run, Popovich reportedly even sat down to watch film with the team. Danny Green is a former Spurs champion and now a commentator with ESPN.
So he came in, I'm sure he left an imprint on them. He let them know who's messing up, who needs to come to play. And that was a big deal for them and for everybody else.
This series has also turned into a debate over officiating. Thunder flops and the way Wembanyama is being defended. And for a while, Oklahoma City's approach really seemed to work.
Yeah, I think the flopping conversation is a big reason this series has become such a talker online. For Spurs fans, it's not just Wemby getting roughed up on every play. They feel like Oklahoma City has guys flying all over the court trying to sell contact on almost every big possession. And then you have the league's MVP, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's brilliant, but also one of the NBA's masters at drawing fouls and controlling whistles. The Spurs looked frustrated in games 2 and 3. The crowd was frustrated too. Social media was exploding after almost every whistle. But what's interesting is how quickly the tone shifted after Game 4 once San Antonio settled down a bit and stopped reacting to every call.
Well, whoever wins will face a well-rested New York Knicks team. They beat the Cleveland Cavaliers in just 4. But what do you think of the West's chances in the finals?
Well, the series has taken a toll on the players. Every game has turned into this emotional and physical grind. And that's true in even some of these double-digit losses. And there's so much intensity around every possession, every whistle, every adjustment. And meanwhile, the Knicks have looked relatively comfortable in the East. So whoever survives this series may be battle-tested, but they're also probably going to be carrying a lot more wear and tear into the finals. And honestly, this matchup between the Spurs and Thunder has already felt like an NBA Finals.
Mm-hmm. Well, you, of course, are based in San Antonio. What's this run feel like in the city right now?
Well, it certainly feels familiar in the best way. Spurs flags are back on the cars, people are honking downtown after wins, and the city's unofficial freebie economy is back. Every Spurs win suddenly means free tacos, free coffee, and somehow this playoff run has even turned a group of Spurs-loving nuns into local celebrities.
Oh, they're great.
And you've got these new songs being written about Wemby that are great as well. For a while, there was this question hanging over San Antonio about what life after the dynasty era would look like. And I can say that that question's now gone. Basketball City has woken back up.
Well, and isn't it interesting when the Spurs start looking great again, the conversation about a new arena begins to follow?
It does. Project Marvel, the billion-dollar plan to move the Spurs downtown, has been contentious. You've had real concerns raised about the use of public money and whether enough is being done for surrounding neighborhoods and residents. But at the same time, this playoff run has reminded people how deeply tied the Spurs are to the city's identity and economy. And while those debates are still happening, the project itself is moving forward. The city has already begun selecting some of the first contractors connected to the project. So now you have people celebrating this playoff run while also fighting hard for the future of their communities.
Dan Katz is Vice President of News at our partner station TPR. Dan, thanks, and go Spurs, go.
Go Spurs, go. Thanks so much for having me.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' compensation provider that's been caring for hardworking Texans for over 30 years. More at texasmutual.com/expert partner.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. A house fire in the middle of the night at the fictional home of April and Leo Torres. It's the kind of moment that resets everything. What do you take? What do you leave behind? And what lingers after the flames are put out? In her new novel, The Burning Side, author Sarah Damoff places a family in that very crisis and follows the fallout as they retreat and regroup at April's childhood home in Dallas and confront the things that were smoldering long before the flames: a marriage under pressure, issues surrounding aging parents and having young kids, and what can for many be a very uneasy question about what home really means. Sarah Damoff, congratulations on your new book. Great to have you back on the Texas Standard.
Thank you so much for having me back.
I was listening to a conversation with another novelist. The author said that his book was semi-autobiographical, and I suppose I've always thought that people who are writing fiction are drawing from their own experience, and I raise that because I wonder why you chose this setting, these particular characters for your sophomore novel.
Yes, I agree. The connection between fiction and reality is often inseparable. Even if most of what's on the page is imagined, it comes from, something that we have experienced, witnessed. And for me, with The Burning Side, I spent a year and a half when I was a newlywed, expecting my first baby, living with my husband's grandparents.
Wow.
His grandmother was sick and his grandfather was healthy. And so he just needed help taking care of her so he would be able to leave the house and not be alone in the house with her, essentially as she was in her last months of life. And so I had this experience that was very formative for me as a young married person who was at the beginning of the story of my family. Every night getting to sit down at the table and have dinner with this couple who had been married for 56 years and they were in their final chapter. And I knew even then in my early 20s that this was giving me a unique perspective that not a lot of my peers or people in the same life stage might be able to have. I just felt like there was enough material there to feed my imagination to tell the story of two very different marriages under the same roof.
I want to shift into the characters of the book, especially April, because she's experiencing what I think a lot of mothers experience when it comes to shouldering so much of the emotional work of family life. Can you say a little bit more about her character and what you drew from to write her?
Absolutely. Yes. So April is in an interesting position because she now has still two young kids, as well as what we find out very quickly in the book is that her father has a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's. And so she's in the sandwich generation where she's a caretaker on both sides. All while her own marriage is crumbling and having to figure that out. And so we also get flashbacks over the past 10 years to find out some secret histories they have, how they got to the point where they are. And in those flashbacks, we see that she has also very recently really struggled with postpartum depression. And so there's a lot of pressure on her, and she doesn't always handle the pressure in the best way. But it was, as I discovered her and wrote about her, and I am a mother and I have friends who are mothers, it was to me what felt the most honest way for this character in these circumstances.
Now, let's talk about Leo.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what were you trying to get across with that character?
So Leo and April are married and come from very different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And as that happens, oftentimes in a relationship, it becomes this kind of pressure position, this kind of mirror. It can be very beautiful or it can be very difficult. April comes from a warm family with wealth and resources. Leo comes from a very broken home and severe poverty, and they come from different cultures. Leo is Mexican American, and so his story is the one that really surprised me because I knew we were going to live with the in-laws for the summer, and he's very close with the April's entire family. It's not, when, as often happens in a marriage, it's not just the two people that are part of the partnership. It's the whole family and those interwoven relationships. And so he's very close with her family, especially because he came from this very broken family he's really not in touch with in the present day. But as I was writing him, I realized how much his past and his family had formed him and had shaped him, and how many unanswered questions he had about his own upbringing that were really important, even if he has married into this wonderful family. And he's now asking those questions as his marriage crumbles. Just what are his roots? What happened in his own family of origin? And how, that's still really important to anyone, even if they kind of find this found family later on.
As working here at the Texas Standard, I'm often thinking about, is there something here that was especially Texan to you about the way that this story unfolds? Obviously, there's the component of Leo and his background, but is this a story that could be set anywhere, do you think, or does Texas become a kind of background player, if you will?
I think it's somewhere in between the two. A lot of the relational dynamics and the multi-generational under one roof family dynamics, relationships, that really could be set anywhere. But Texas is important, and I would say it's specifically interesting to look at it in the context of Leo's character and his background, because he is Mexican American. Both of his parents came over from Mexico, did not have a network or community or easy time of it. And that is a big part of how he grew up and what shaped him. I had a reader ask, why make Leo a minority? And I said, well, actually, maybe not everyone is aware of this, but in Texas, the largest ethnic group is the Hispanic demographic.
Absolutely.
And so it really is, to me, and I am born and raised, I'm a Texas native. And so to me, I really feel like writing is like a transcribing of what I observe around me. And so there was I wasn't intentionally like, I'm going to write about this thing. I just was like, okay, what is a common experience of marriage here in the place where we're setting this, which is Texas? And so I think that I think Billy and Deb are very kind of typical Dallas people, and that's all there. And there are some, some fun certain settings that are familiar for us as Texans. But really, this experience of Leo's arc with his parents and his experience being Mexican American, and then in a marriage where he didn't marry into that same culture, that can happen anywhere, but it's more prevalent here in Texas.
Sure. Sarah Damoff is the author of a new book called The Burning Side. Her previous book, The Bright Years, received a lot of acclaim. We're going to have a link to an extended version of our conversation over at texasstandard.org, and you can dig a little deeper into her latest. Sarah, thanks so much for taking time to join us again on the Texas Standard. Nice to talk with you, and again, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the online UT High School, offering a full-time diploma program for remote, asynchronous learners throughout Texas. More at highschool.utexas.edu/tuition-free.
This is the Texas Standard. I'm Angela Kocherga. As we mentioned, it's primary runoff day in Texas, and people across the state are going to the polls once again to finalize party nominees for the November ballot. Races include the highly watched GOP Senate contest, but there are also other key races. So we thought we'd spend some time highlighting 5 things to watch as the results start to come in later tonight. For that, we're joined by Mark Jones, a political science professor at Rice University. Professor Jones, welcome back to the Texas Standard.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Well, most Texans and many national political observers will be keyed in on that Republican Senate race runoff. Why is this getting so much attention, and how close do you think it will be?
Well, it's getting quite a bit of attention, first and foremost, because it's the most expensive primary in U.S. history. There's been a lot of money spent. We're over $150 million by now on TV ads alone, and President Trump's weighed in. It's also a race that cues things up for the November election. Democrats believe that if Ken Paxton, the deeply flawed GOP candidate with more political dirty laundry or personal, financial, legal dirty laundry than pretty much anyone, if he's the nominee, Democrats think they have a realistic probability or possibility of winning in Texas, and that could be the first Democratic victory statewide since 1994. And it could play a role in tipping the Senate to the Democratic Party for their final 2 years of Donald Trump's tenure in office.
You want to even hazard a guess about how close it will be? Or
I think at this point, after President Trump's endorsement of Ken Paxton, it's likely to be a Paxton victory. Now, if we have exceptionally high turnout on Election Day by people who support John Cornyn at a rate much higher than those who support Ken Paxton, in theory, Cornyn could win. But I think right now we're looking at a Paxton victory, and it probably will be at least by the mid to high single digits.
Well, of course, with Paxton leaving, the job of Texas Attorney General is open. Where does that runoff stand, and why is this a top race to watch? And I guess it's a two-parter because we have runoffs on both sides of the aisle.
Right. So on the Republican side, you have Mays Middleton and Chip Roy. Middleton was trailing Roy throughout the fall, but then used much of his vast personal fortune to leapfrog Roy in the actual March primary and came into this runoff as the favorite. Roy, however, has received over $5 million from West Texas billionaire or almost billionaire Alex Fairley, and that's helped him narrow the gap. You have two very conservative candidates. Middleton has never run afoul of Donald Trump, whereas Chip Roy has on occasion. That's the main difference. The other is that Roy is touting his vast experience as the litigator and as a lawyer, and underscoring that Middleton's experience is primarily representing his family's oil firm.
Well, another race to watch is for the U.S. House in the Houston area. What can you tell us about the 18th Congressional District?
Well, this is a historic district. It's been represented by people like Sheila Jackson Lee and Barbara Jordan and Mickey Leland. It's one where both Al Green and Christian Menifee represent both sitting members of Congress. Green, who arrived more than 20 years ago, Menifee arrived a couple months ago. They're going neck and neck. What we find is that an overwhelming majority of Democratic primary voters in 18 like both of these candidates. They can only send one of them back. This race will come down to turnout. Turnout in the area in Houston in the Democratic primary has been quite low. And this means that whoever between the two candidates, Menifee or Green, can get their supporters to actually turn out and cast a ballot will be the one that will win.
Well, and finally, a fifth race Texans will be keeping an eye on is in the Dallas area, the 33rd Congressional District. Tell us about that.
Well, there you have Julie Johnson, who is a sitting member of Congress, and Colin Allred, who is the member of Congress who Julie Johnson replaced, vying in a new district that actually was Mark Vesey's district because Johnson's district, the old 32, was redistricted into a Republican district. This is another very competitive race between two Democrats that's going to boil down to turnout. Allred did well in the first round because, in part, Jasmine Crockett was mobilizing African-American turnout at record levels. That's not there in this primary runoff. I think Allred has a small advantage, but that's another one where it's really going to boil down to turnout.
Mark Jones is a political science professor at Rice University. Professor, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And you're listening to the Texas Standard. Our audience and engagement editor, Wells Dunbar, is back. Great to talk to you again, Wells.
Great to be with the very engaging Angela Corchega here. So definitely. Always a pleasure, Angela. We're talking about Election Day here in the primary runoffs. And again, a real fascinating comment I found here via Reddit, I believe the Texas Politics subreddit. I love this comment to the story here. The race in the primary that will show us where the Texas GOP is headed. It's not what you think. And I love that headline. Do they work for our website? I don't know. It's a really well-crafted one. It goes on to say that Cornyn versus Paxton is important, but I think the race that can really tell us the direction of the party is the Railroad Commissioner race with incumbent Jim Wright versus Beau French. And why is that? Well, if you're interested there, Beau French, he's really barely campaigned on issues related to the office at all. Of course, the Railroad Commission, somewhat of a misnomer, as it oversees oil and gas issues in Texas. Quite a important responsibility there as well. But instead, candidate French is really focused on these so-called culture war issues, really going up against things like Islam in Texas and DEI policies and the like. So I guess as this Redditor is positing, could be somewhat of a bellwether in terms of who is going to get that race, but win the race, the primary race. But moreover, which wing of the Republican Party is going to, take that one? The incumbent getting Governor Greg Abbott's endorsement, Jim Wright. But again, Beau French mounting somewhat of a, I guess you could call, insurgent campaign. So again, another race to watch this election night. And of course, this is the finale for most of it. And people, again, very excited. Another Redditor complaining that it's been an endless stream of Cornyn and Paxton. Endless. Literally every 10 minutes on network TV. I will be so glad when it is over. So, of course, lots of excitement, lots of stories and races to watch there on the Republican side. Another race that's sort of, operated somewhat under the radar. It's not a statewide race. It's the House 35 Democratic primary. I think some folks will be watching that. There has been some controversy regarding Democratic congressional candidate Maureen Galindo over what has been characterized as anti-Semitic remarks she has made. She's going up against Johnny Garcia there in the Democratic House 35 primary. So another race to watch. And of course, if you have questions over what exactly is on your ballot, I got a little URL you can visit. It's called texasstandard.org. You can go there and type in your address. It will give you a sample ballot showing you the races that you're up for, because it can be kind of confusing, obviously. Again, that's texasstandard.org. And while you're there, go to texasstandard.org/talk. Record us a voicemail message telling us about the election and what you are watching.
Yeah, thank you, Wells. We're out of time for today's program. We appreciate you for listening today. Hope you can join us again tomorrow. I'm Angela Corchega, wishing you the very best from El Paso.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare. the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family.